In this episode of the B2B or Not to Be podcast, we're talking all things branding. It's a really interesting one. I'm joined by our senior graphic designer, Vanessa Tracy, who's got huge amounts of experience in this area. And we're talking about branding, what it is and what it isn't. So Vanessa, one might think that branding is just a logo. I think you might disagree. I suspect you will disagree with me there. So what is branding and why does it matter?
Yeah, branding is definitely much more than just a logo. I feel like a logo is just like kind of the pants that a brand decides to wear as part of the continual uniform. But there's a lot more of a statement that needs to be made. So you need to be talking about who you are as a business, what your like target audience is, why you're doing what you're doing. So it's more about your messaging, the output that you're putting into the world, whether it's a product or service, if it's business to business, or just if it's business to customer as well. But it's definitely much more than just a logo and a color palette. It kind of all has to cohesively work together with like your mission and your vision, your values as well.
Absolutely, yeah. And that is where the uniqueness comes in. If you're not thinking about all those different elements and all those different parts of your business, then yeah, it's going to be very hard to create something that's individual and unique to you.
Yeah, definitely. Because if you're just going out and making a logo without having like the heart and soul of a business, then people have pretty good detectors of seeing through that sort of stuff. So it just ends up falling a bit flat or feeling quite shallow, and it's just aesthetics driven. It's very on trend when you do things like that, which can be like quite eye-catching, but then it often falls short and it isn't timeless. It's not relevant to what your brand is and what you're saying like as a business.
Yeah. And something that you said right up, which the first thing you said, which was really speaking my language, you didn't start with color palette and what things look like. It is thinking about, really thinking about your business in a deep way, and who are you, why are you doing it, how do you do it, all that. I'm Carolyn Andrews, Head of Content here at Transform Communications. I have over 20 years experience now working in marketing and communications, and that's included working with numerous organisations on their branding and rebranding, and particularly the verbal side of that. I'm joined by Vanessa Tracy, our senior graphic designer, who has heaps of really relevant experience in this topic. She's worked on brands and brand refreshes for retail, consumer, and business-to-business organisations. I was really excited to talk to her about all her experience in branding from the graphic design side. So do you have any sort of tips or advice or ways that you've used in the past to help sort of uncover and unearth that? I know from our experience that people don't always know what their brand is and what they stand for, and they sense it and they feel it. But to turn that into a helpful brief to create something with, that needs to be uncovered. How do you go about doing that?
Usually with like brand discovery sessions, they're so beneficial for writing a brief. I find your discovery sessions, if you're doing it as a business or if you're bringing it in with like an agency, for example, it's always best to have your creatives and your strategic like idea makers in the room with you. And just constantly asking why. So just drill down and get to your unique selling proposition, or what is your difference, or what is your benefit? Why do you do what you do? How do you do what you do? Why is that better than your competitor? If you just continually ask yourself like how, what, and why, but further and further and further, because if it needs to be an elevator pitch, basically. If it's too complicated and many bullet points, then you're not getting it across clear enough. So you need to make sure that it is getting down to the bare bones of like what your service offering is, who you are as people. Get your team involved at a few stages, especially with the likes of your mission and your values. It's really important to have everyone on board and get really unique insights from the rest of your team, but try to limit how many cooks are in the kitchen during your strategy session, because then it just ends up quite a lot of noise. So you want to make sure that there is like just quite key stakeholders in that kind of momentum, like initial brief session. But if you can try and get like your strategic and your creatives involved from an early stage, then you'd be quite surprised to see what sort of questions, or not necessarily the questions that get raised, but the answers that you get, like your key difference to where you're going with it. So just constantly questioning and just simplifying and just getting down to like, what do you do? How do you do it? Why are you so good at it? Like what's the passion with it?
Yeah, absolutely. We found those like deep dive type workshops to develop a proposition and really sort of dig deep, keep asking the questions, keep asking the same questions and see what comes up. It's really helpful from a branding perspective, but it's really helpful from a business perspective as well, for getting people on the same page. And sometimes people disagree in ways they hadn't realised before one of those sessions about what the business is and what it does. And actually that's a really productive thing to uncover and resolve. So yeah, I love doing those workshops. They're really good. And as you said, not getting a wide range of people involved in some way. You've got, subject matter experts in the business that aren't necessarily your chief exec, and sort of getting their input as well is really good.
Yeah, it's quite interesting when people kind of challenge different things, because then you can kind of understand that, like, especially if it's something like your mission or your values and you've got like people in one camp saying this and then someone like disagreeing, it's really good to like get down to why, because then if there is a clear reason of why like your staff don't necessarily believe that that's either a priority for you or it's not something that you're doing well, then it kind of challenges you to set it up as KPIs for your business, as goals, or as something that's just like, well, okay, this isn't something we're on the same page with. Is it something we need to work on, or is it something that we just kind of need to push to the side? With some retail companies that I've worked for and done branding with, the values side of it, getting the customer service team involved is always really nice. So they come up with like generally like more key stakeholders and decision makers during a rebrand come up with kind of like 5 to 10, and then it's like a bit more of a survey thing to get involvement of the people that are actually the face of the brand, so the people that are interacting with your customers and that sort of thing, like having them feeling like they have like a little bit of autonomy and a bit of power in that sort of thing. But also you can't go and just tell your staff like, these are our values, if they're the ones that are supposed to be living and breathing it. Like that sort of thing needs to be a forever evolving thing, and having people involved with that sort of stuff can make a huge difference. And you can often find that like the more like heart and soul of your business that you understand, that informs like your new unique difference. It can uncover like audience types that you're not necessarily targeting and that sort of thing. It can also help your creatives when it comes to the logo and the branding and the color palette and that sort of thing. Same as your tone of voice, like it all kind of feeds in together, but it all has to kind of play together, like work seamlessly and like get along quite nice.
Yeah, and if you're getting a consistent view from your whole team and different parts of the business, then you're going to get that consistency across your brand. And definitely I found the same in B2B marketing with getting the customer service or the client success team involved. It's like, what do your clients love about you? What do they say is great about you? And that is part of your proposition and your brand. What are people already saying is great about you, and build that into it as well. And speaking to the sales team, they're having conversations with people out in the market all day, every day. What are they saying? So there's all these different sources of insights and information that you can draw from. So we're pretty unanimous on the fact that branding is more than a logo and a colour palette. You need to bring in a lot more elements to make sure your brand is authentic to who you are, but also unique. Your brand is your values. It's about how you make people feel. It's about how your employees feel. And ultimately, it's what people say about you at the end of the day. There's a load of tools you can use to uncover your why and keep on digging to find your authentic brand. We'll go on to talk about these, and it's really interesting to find out about some of Vanessa's experience in this area from the graphic design perspective. So your brand needs to be authentic and true to who you are. And in our deep dive workshops and some of the proposition work we do with clients, we're big fans of Simon Sinek here. And we do a lot around the, why, how, and what model. How do you ensure that your brand reflects your why and who you are as a business? Yeah. So your brand needs to be unique, and just having a pink logo isn't enough to make you unique. How do you make your brand unique?
Especially in like a post-Barbie world. A pink logo is not going to cut the mustard. And neither is just making it rainbow for June. So with, I think we always get a bit stuck on like, how is our logo going to like represent us as a business and things like that. So it's like, it's important to be considering that. But again, this comes back to the whole, your brand is so much more than just your logo. So you need to have visual differentiators to make sure that it's not just like, it's pink or it's an elephant. Like if that's the only difference between you and your competitors, then like you probably need to work more on your unique selling benefit and your proposition to your customers, or perhaps your audience that you're going for is much different to your competitors. You need to kind of look into the mirror and like self-assess a little bit, but also assess your competitors like in the space to see what differences they have, like how unique are you, like genuinely. If you're going to be doing either a rebrand or launching a new business, you need to make sure that you are going to stand out, that you are offering something similar, something good and something different to what's out there, rather than just something that already exists. Because if it's something that's the same as your competitor, just reskinned, recolored, just repackaged and sent out into the world, like we don't need more duplicates of what's going on. Like we need a lot more businesses that are trying to evoke change or doing something different, challenge the status quo and move things forward. So just again, constantly asking the who, what, why about yourself, but then also doing a competitor analysis. So any kind of questions you're asking of yourself, try and put yourself into your competitor's shoes and ask similar questions of that, and try and see what similarities there are, because there will be crossover with your competitors, and there should be, because you're competing in the space. But you should be able to find like some quite interesting, like unique differences between a lot of opportunities around your audience as well, which is really good. Always like look at diversity and accessibility when you're doing your branding work as well, because like quite often if you do ensure that your audience, like you are being quite inclusive with your audience, you might discover that there is an entire demographic that's just getting like just lost in the void compared to your competitors. So you could be doing a much better job in that kind of inclusivity space, but then it's also like a massive marketing opportunity as well to ensure that these people are being heard and seen and spoken to, because it might be something that might very much deliver and change the way that they live their life as well. So I think it's quite important to just constantly be asking like what it is about your branding and your business that is different to your competitors, and then always like looking at what they're doing and be like, well, what are they doing that's better than us? What are they doing that's worse than us? Like what is on par? And kind of look at like competitor adjacent, so like aspirational brands and things that do something well in their space, and why that's different to their competitors, because that can kind of give you some like sort of adjacent ideas of where you can go, and some opportunities that you could kind of bring back and realign with either your sector or your industry, but it can enlighten a few ideas.
And all of that applies to your visual identity, but it applies to your verbal identity as well.
Yeah.
And how you're talking about yourself, how you're expressing yourself. It is, you know, is it different, and is it making a difference in the space, but is it appropriate to your industry? And it's finding that sweet spot, isn't it? Where,
yeah, definitely.
Yeah, you're not just doing the cookie cutter thing, but you're also making sure that you're aligning and you're attuned to your audience.
It keeps it all incredibly relevant as well, but more relevant to your audience and your service and what you're actually doing, but relevant to yourself as a business, rather than just relevant to the current trend that's happening. Exactly. It's not just forest green with like a really nice like bold serif font, like that's going to come and go. It's not just ticking boxes that are like visually happening at the moment. It's something that is a lot more timeless for your business and makes a lot more sense for your business. So people will kind of look at it and go, hey, this really represents like what you do and who you are, and this makes a lot of sense. If you're a very like conservative company, you shouldn't have necessarily like a very cutesy kind of playful logo with like bubbly text and things like that. Like that doesn't make any sense with like the people that you are and the like business that you're selling and that sort of thing. So you've got to make sure that like your visuals will align, as long as you know deep down who you are, why you do what you do, and how you do it.
Yeah, and the same, you know, if you're a professional services company in a particular space, or, you know, your market is very tech focused in a very sort of deep way, talking like a innocent smoothies brand or Oatly, or while it might be cool, it's not going to resonate with your market. And also, yeah, it might be on trend now, but once everyone's doing it, that trend passes, and you're left with a brand that isn't relevant to you and isn't trendy anymore either.
Yeah, because then you've just done stuff for the sake of it. But that's a really good point about making sure that like even if you are going for trends, making sure that they're relevant. Because if you are something that's in tech or in finance or something like, you can be a bit more conversational, but at the same time it's like you are supposed to be about like future momentum with technology, and people are supposed to be trusting you with their money and that sort of thing. So having something like a little guy on a skateboard with like a flower is like, that's really cool for like bakeries and beers, like not necessarily for like fintech and that sort of thing. Like you've got to kind of pick it, and like people that are interested in like stock portfolios and that sort of stuff can also be interested in like nice pastries and coffees and craft beer, but it doesn't necessarily like translate into everything that they do sort of thing. So it's like we are all multifaceted people as consumers, but you still need to be paying attention to the sector that you're working in, the people, the mindset of the people when they're trying to buy your service or use your products or anything like that. So yeah, making sure it's relevant.
Yeah, and you can play with it and be a bit creative in the space, but again within the boundaries of making sure that it's relevant to your audience. So if you are in a space that is traditionally very technical, very dry, actually differentiating yourself. If you are the kind of business that is a works at a different pace, your people are curious and energetic, and you can reflect that in your visual and verbal branding without having to go full wacky.
Yeah, definitely. Tone of voice is like such an important part with any kind of branding identity, and that definitely flows into all the comms that you put out for your audience and for your suppliers and everything. So I think that kind of hits the nail on the head. Like if you're, which you'd probably discover in your discovery session that you're doing, like if your unique difference between your competitors is that they are very like, we keep on circling back to tech here, but if they're very like technical and like there's a lot of assumed knowledge in this space, then perhaps a big opportunity for you is more conversational of just like anyone can do this. Like let's open up the door to more people. You don't have to have all this prior knowledge. Like we'll hold your hand through it, and you can do that kind of like gentle tone of voice kind of branding quite successfully without going like very conversational, and also not doing it in a condescending way where like kind of get down to people's level, not talking down to them sort of thing. Yeah,
absolutely. We've got a client where that was exactly the case. All the content out in the market was very, very technical. And we've developed a lot of content for them that's still on brand, but just takes it back to that clear, concise, explains things very clearly in a very accessible way. But you don't dumb down the tone of voice, and it doesn't have to be, super, super simple and super basic. It can still speak to your audience of technical people on their level, but it doesn't have to try to be clever or try to be complex. And even that is a differentiator in the market.
Yeah, you don't need to hide behind jargon and that sort of thing. Like if you know your stuff inside out, you should be able to explain it like pretty clearly and pretty comfortably to the average bear. Yeah,
absolutely. So we're clearly members of the Simon Sinek fan club, and anyone that knows Transform will know that. And being pink just isn't going to cut it in a post-Barbie world. You need to do something different. Another really key point was about the importance of diversity and inclusion when it comes to your brand. And that also creates opportunities, but you need to look at it from both a visual identity and a verbal identity perspective. And your visual and verbal identity need to be aligned to who you are and the markets that you operate in. With a lot of experience in rebranding and brand refreshes, I was really interested to hear Vanessa's experience in this area as well. So yeah, based on your extensive experience of rebranding and refreshing branding of organisations, say someone's listening to this and their business has been around for say about 5 years, they've grown, they're not a 2-person team anymore, they've got a new office, a bigger team, a bigger client base, and they're looking to sort of refresh their brand to reflect who they are, because their brand's kind of it is who they were 5 years ago, not who they are now. What would your advice to them be?
I'd say like you don't want to do rebrands and refreshes like too regularly, because then it feels like a bit of an identity crisis. But definitely when you've hugely outscaled where you were, like it's like if you've got a lot of growth and momentum kind of like leaning into that, is a really great opportunity to kind of reassess who your target audience is, your team members, get them involved in a few more steps, like just revisit again, like come back to the heart and soul and just the bare bones of what you do, why you do it, how you do it, who you're doing it for. And like, it's a really great idea to do that competitor analysis kind of thing, but on yourself again. So again, just constantly looking in the mirror to see like how much you've changed, where you've gone, and use that as your bones and like your building blocks to kind of take yourself further. Because if you have massively outscaled where you were, then hey, that's really great. Like, let's pat on the back.
Celebrate that.
Yeah, absolutely. Celebrate the wins. No one else will. Like, yeah, you absolutely have to. But then reassessing kind of like what does that mean to your audience? Like, is a rebrand something that will resonate with them, or is it something that's like, well, actually this isn't the right time for it because we're starting to get brand recognition there. So I think making sure that you are sense checking whether or not it's the right thing to do. But again, definitely if you've gone from something that's quite a small team to now like multiple employees, like new offices and that sort of thing, it's a really great thing to be able to represent yourself in a much more professional space as well, like elevate yourself, push yourself further. If you want to tag on like some of that momentum and keep a bit of historical elements, like you can do it in interesting different ways, like whether it's like elements throughout your brand book or like photography and like historical like kind of documents, like postcard sort of styles, or you could just do like more of a minor brand refresh where you just kind of update elements or like keep a little bit of like suggestion of what your branding was. So like sometimes when there's really good momentum but quite a lot of change, a refresh rather than a full rebrand can be quite a nice way to do that. So it's modernizing, it's moving things forward, it's in expanding your branding into more of a space where you're at, but also always do it consistently. So what I see like quite often a lot of designers do is like, here's a new logo, the website hasn't changed, or like, we have a new logo, we need new business cards, you need a new website. Like you need to do your digital platforms like quite quickly when you're doing that, because that's the fastest way that you see people. Like your website is your shop front. If you've got a new office, update your decals and your welcome signage and that sort of thing. If you do expo stands, have that done. Like a rebrand is like, can be quite costly, but it's very beneficial. Like it's not costly, it's a significant investment, but it is an investment because it is the face of your brand. It is everything that you put out to the world before anyone opens their mouth to actually give a message. So you want to make sure that you're doing it consistently. Otherwise, if it isn't done consistently and in a really tidy way, then you're just ensuring that it's going to fall flat and it's like people aren't going to resonate with it because it's kind of hobbling along rather than it being like a full launch. So making sure that it is the right thing to do for your audience, your sector, your target market, you as a business for where you're at the moment, but making sure you do it right, because measure twice, cut once, right? Like
you want a ta-da, not a
yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Completely agree. It's managing that. It's where a good spreadsheet or a good project management tool comes in. It's not all about sort of like you said. It's not all about the visuals and how things look. It's about how it's managed as well, and that's really important to make sure it's consistent and it's happening across all the different parts of your all your different assets and all the different parts of your business.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that's a really good point you made about checking in with yourself, because I think when people rebrand or refresh their branding, they're often doing that based on assumptions from that point 5 years ago where they started the business, and they're basing it on what they were then. So checking in with yourself and checking in with those assumptions is really important to do that when you're doing a rebrand or a brand refresh. And that goes for both your visual identity, but also your verbal identity. And is your tone of voice the same? Is your purpose still the same? Has that changed slightly? And is everyone on the same page about it? It's a really good opportunity to look at these things. It's an opportunity that you don't really want to miss. If you're going to go with a brand refresh, then it's a really good time to do that.
Especially with the key message, because sometimes, like especially for startups, your unique selling benefit might be your size or lack thereof. Like you get that one-on-one contact with the founders of the business and that sort of thing. But if you've grown to now you've got like quite a few key stakeholders and you've got like a tier of like upper and middle management and that sort of thing, you're not getting that like bespoke one-to-one contact with the founders. But that isn't necessarily a bad thing. Like growth is a very big and a very important thing. So you should celebrate your successes and you should be informing your customers with that. But if that isn't necessarily your unique selling benefit, you can discover like quite new ones. It might be the amount of years worth of experience that your team have, or the amount of qualifications under one roof, things like that. You can find similar ways to reword what your unique selling benefit was, but you do need to like kind of...
It does need to be reflected.
It needs to be like truthful and that sort of thing,
And similarly, maybe your tone of voice was scrappy, punchy startup 5 years ago, but that feels really and it was authentic back then. But if you've got offices in different parts of the world with multiple people working for you, that tone of voice might not be quite right anymore. And there's still a space to be unique and have your own voice, but it might not be quite the same as it was. So yeah, they're all really important things to look at.
Yeah, definitely. It's also a really good angle for just storytelling, which like helps really well, especially with the visual, with the verbal side of your branding, like just telling that story of like growth and momentum, and like things 5 years ago was a lot longer than we realize. A lot's
happened.
A lot. It's been a time.
It has.
Yeah, a lot's happened. So lean into that. Like just ignoring that the last 5 years kind of didn't happen isn't helping anyone. So talking about like if you have had really good growth and momentum, like talk to it. It's really important, and it's a really interesting thing because there were a lot of businesses that didn't come out unscathed in the last few years. So it's like you have to kind of celebrate your wins again, because no one else will.
I love a story arc as well.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah,
a compelling narrative that takes you on that hero's journey. Is a winner.
I can just hear like Rocky in the background.
So those are some great tips for rebranding and staying fresh and current, and a helpful reminder not to do it too often. Again, it's really important to look at your why and go deeper. Take a look in the mirror. What's changed? I also thought that was a really interesting point about using a rebrand or a brand refresh as an opportunity to celebrate your wins. Tell your story. I think a lot of brands don't do this enough. Storytelling is a really important part of your verbal brand identity. So in the next part of our chat, we went on to discuss the dangers of hippos in the room.
I think a lot of people work in marketing because they have opinions, myself included. And, you know, it's good to express your opinion, have an opinion, express an opinion, be able to communicate your opinion. But with branding, that's quite a challenge, because I think businesses and people in businesses can kind of get in their own way about branding. Is that something you've experienced?
Yeah, definitely. Like I think it's always very important to like get into your customer's shoes, but it's also really important to just like take them off and just be barefoot for a little bit. You definitely want to have an understanding of where your customers are coming from, and you need to love your branding and your whole identity suite, both visual and verbal. Like it needs to be talking the language that you're talking, and from a visual point of view, it needs to represent like the personality that you're trying to put forward. You have to like it and enjoy it, but at the end of the day, it needs to resonate with your customers. Like not all of us working for our companies are necessarily our customers as well. A lot of the time we are. Like there's a lot of retail brands out there that have super fans working for them, which is great. But if you're not necessarily your customer. So you need to like appreciate and understand your branding, but you need to remember that it needs to resonate with your viewers. So if there's a certain color that you don't like, or like a bit of a font that's in like the tagline, or something that you just like, I just really can't stand purple, or something like that. Like, is it the hill that is worth dying on? Like kind of, is it going to bother you every time you see it? Then it's definitely worth fighting the good fight to get rid of it. But at the same time, if it's something that has, especially if there's data behind it, like if you have any kind of like research or information that shows that this does really resonate with your customers, or this is really important, or if this is something that does wholeheartedly represent like the majority of the people that work for you kind of thing, I think it's important that you lean more into what will work and will resonate with your customers and your clients than your own personal perspectives, because we all have our own opinions. Like, we all have an opinion, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's fact. Like you can't take everything as just like my way or the highway sort of thing, because that's how like that sort of mentality with branding always ends up landing a bit short. Design by committee never works.
Yes,
like the hovering art director,
how to water something down.
yeah, the boardroom art director, those sorts of things just like never really work. Like you can't keep everyone massively pleased. So whenever there are people challenging like creative differences or tone of voice differences or like storytelling or anything like that, kind of bring it back to like, is this delivering the main message that we want as a business? Does this meet our brand guidelines that we're trying to set up? Is this true to our identity? If it is, then there's your answer. Like it all comes back to everything that you've established in like your how, what, why.
That's why that setup piece is so important, because when you're having heated debates, discussions later on in the process about colours and look and feel, and if you can go back to those insights, to that research, you've got something to really sort of base that on.
Yeah.
And that makes me think of, I've only recently come across the hippo concept, which, as well as designed by committee, the hippo in the room is also potentially an issue. The highest paid person in an organisation in the room, and it is that person might have very strong feelings about a colour or a particular look. But again, if that doesn't resonate with the audience, then you're potentially making a mistake there. So yeah, going back to the setup work that you did and all that good research and customer insights is really important.
It's quite funny mentioning the whole like hippo thing of like the highest paid, especially if you're working in more of like if your service or product that you're selling is in the value space, it's like you're in a different tax bracket. You're a very different demographic to your customers. Like the stuff that you're trying to communicate to your audience base, they might demographically be very different to you. So you might have like interest XYZ, whereas your customers are more like sitting in like ABC. So it's very important to make sure that everything that you're putting out there is representative to what your customers are going to pay attention to. It's all about the message being received loud and clear by them, not necessarily you in like your personal life. Because again, like we are very well-rounded people and we all have different life experiences and a lot of different interests. And the piece that you're selling or your service or your benefit that you have is only one piece of the whole for a person. So even though you really you obviously want to like love your company's branding and your business branding, especially if you're the business owner, you do need to make sure that it always comes back to making sense for your business and what you're putting out there, but also the people that are going to be receiving it.
Absolutely.
I really enjoyed talking to Vanessa about branding. Her passion and extensive experience all came through in our conversation. It was particularly interesting because I come to it from a verbal identity and a verbal side of branding, and she comes to it from a visual element. So a couple of key points. Always remember, you are not your customer, and it all comes back to doing your research. Dig deeper, find your why, find who you are authentically and what makes you different. And that's a really good foundation for any creation of a new brand, rebranding, or brand refresh. Thanks for listening. Hope you enjoyed our conversation as much as I did. Remember to subscribe wherever you listen to or watch your podcasts.